A cold wind stirred dust across the near-empty auction yard, curling around worn boots and frayed skirts, lifting whispers from mouths too used to speaking ill of what they did not understand. The wooden platform creaked beneath the weight of a woman the town had labeled Ugliest, as though her bones had betrayed her by growing too broad. Her skin had sinned by embracing the sun. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, the cuffs of her dress falling loose around her wrists, patched and sagging, as if even the fabric had given up trying to hold her. But her eyes, they didn't blink. They didn't flinch. They watched the crowd as one might watch a storm from a safe distance, knowing the thunder would not reach them. Her father had died a debtor, the kind of man who worked his hands to the bone, but never seemed to fill the cracks of poverty that ran through their bloodline. Now, the debts had been called, and with no land, no inheritance, only his daughter remained, a breathing ledger meant to be balanced. The auctioneer called for bids with a tone that wasn't business, but spectacle. Laughter echoed among the sparse crowd, not from humor, but from a certain cruelty born when people feel superior. A wealthy shopkeeper, the one who always sold lace gloves and soft silks to the preacher's daughters, raised his hand lazily. He named a figure loud enough to be heard, but low enough to insult. The crowd chuckled. His word that followed, "For decoration, maybe scarecrows need wives," wrung another round of cruel smiles. No man truly wanted her. Not for a home. Not for a life. They wanted a story to tell over drinks, a sneer they could pass to their sons. She stood, an oak among willows, unmoving, unbent. Then, from the back where the dust gathered thicker, a voice came. It wasn't loud. It didn't seek attention. A single bid, firm and final. Heads turned, necks craned. A man leaned against a fence post, arms crossed. Weathered, quiet. A rancher known for losing his wife to fever 3 winters past, for 10 his land as though it were his only kin. His face bore no expression. He didn't glance around for approval. He simply bid. The auctioneer hesitated, his eyes searching for another to raise a hand, to perhaps outbid, to stretch this moment into a theater. But silence sat heavy. No hands rose. The gavel came down with sound that felt more like mercy than transaction. She stepped down from the platform. There were no cheers, no jeers now. The town had lost interest the moment it wasn't amusing. She expected a rough hand to claim her arm, a muttered command, something to remind her of her place. Instead, he simply said, "Let's go," as though it wasn't an order, as though it was an invitation. Their walk to his wagon was slow. The murmurs faded behind them like a storm moving further away. She climbed up without help, because that was her way. He didn't offer, because that was his respect. The ride was quiet, but not empty. The wheels hummed over the dirt, the horses' hooves tapping a rhythm that settled nerves rather than stirred them. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask about debts or dowry or what she could do. His eyes stayed on the horizon, his words few, but when they came, they were aimed at her hands. Hands that looked like they knew work. Hands that had mended more than they had broken. "You work with leather?" he asked, not with curiosity, but with a craftsman's recognition. She nodded. "Good. I got tack that needs mending." No flattery. No pity. Just need and trust. For the first time, she felt seen. Not the face the town had mocked, not the figure they had measured and found wanting, but the parts of her that mattered, the parts that built. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of dust and wild sage. She breathed it in, and for a fleeting moment, the bruises left by the town's judgment felt lighter. The ranch lay ahead, a place she had not chosen, but perhaps a place that had chosen her. He did not fill silences with noise, and she found peace in that. For words were often knives when wielded by those who looked but never truly saw. He spoke of the ranch as though it were alive. He spoke of the well needing repair, of fence posts that leaned, of calves that would be born come spring. Not once did he speak of loneliness. Not once did he speak of saving her. She realized then this was not a rescue. This was not a purchase. This was a man who saw her worth in hands that knew the weight of a hammer, the thread of a needle. As the wagon rolled onward, the town disappeared behind them, swallowed by the dust they left behind. The future wasn't promised. It wasn't even spoken of. But in that quiet ride to nowhere, a single truth settled in her chest. Sometimes, the most beautiful beginnings come wrapped in silence. Morning mist curled over the ranch fields, softening the edges of fences and blurring the line where earth kissed sky. She knelt in the soil, fingers buried deep, pressing seedlings into furrows with the tenderness of a mother tucking in her child. Dirt coated her palms, filled the ridges of her skin until it felt like a second body, one the world hadn't scorned into shame. Across the field, he stood watching, not with hunger, not with pity, but with the quiet pride of a man seeing a broken tool find its rightful craft. He had not given her tasks. No orders had been spoken that first week, nor the second. He merely let her roam, let her eyes find what needed doing. A gate that hung loose on its hinge, a saddle with a torn strap, a calf coughing in the chill mornings. She took them in, claimed them as hers, and with each mend, with each repair, the ranch seemed to breathe her in. When he noticed her working on the old plow yoke, he left a small file and an oil can near the fence post. No words, just tools appearing where she would find them. It was his way of speaking, of recognizing. She understood. Meals were quiet affairs. The table, long enough for 10, seated only 2. He ate slow, without urgency, as if the act itself was enough to fill the air. She began to notice, amidst the clink of spoons and the murmur of the wind outside, that he always waited for her to take the first bite, every evening, without fail. One evening, when the sun spilled gold across the wooden floorboards, she dared to break the rhythm. "Your wife, was she like me?" He paused, not in discomfort, but in choosing his words. His voice was soft, worn like river stone. She was kind, but fragile. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. "You're not fragile," he added after a while. It wasn't flattery. It wasn't comparison. It was a statement, solid as the beams that held the roof above them. She thought of that often, especially when the storm came. It roared over the plains one late afternoon, tearing at shingles, bending trees into supplicants. The barn roof had always been a little weary, and now it threatened to give in. She didn't wait. While the sky split with thunder, she climbed the ladder, hammer in hand. Sleeves rolled high. The wind fought her, pulling at her hair, flinging rain against her face, but she refused to be idle. Idle was for those who waited to be saved. A crack of lightning kissed a nearby hill, startling her hands into fumbling the hammer. It clattered against the boards. Her heart raced, a primal reminder of mortality. Then, through the veil of rain, she saw him. He stood below, holding a lantern, though the storm made little room for its glow. He said nothing, no scolding for her stubbornness, no orders to come down. He simply offered light. She fixed the last shingle beneath its soft circle of warmth. When her feet touched the ground again, they shared a look, brief but binding, a promise, unspoken yet absolute, that they would always show up for one another. Weeks turned into months, and with spring came the need to visit town. Supplies had dwindled, and though the thought of returning churned her stomach, she packed the wagon without a word. The town stares had not softened. Whispers slithered through doorways as they passed, the old insults still lingering in the air like stale tobacco smoke. But this time he walked beside her. He didn't shield her as one might a fragile object. He stood with the stillness of a mountain, immovable, uninterested in the fickle winds of gossip. His presence did not challenge the whispers, nor did it bow to them. It rendered them insignificant, and in his calm, unbothered way, she found a shield stronger than any wall. At the mercantile, when the shopkeeper's eyes flicked to her with thinly veiled contempt, the rancher placed their list on the counter and looked not at the man but at her, as if she was the only person whose opinion mattered in that room. The shopkeeper, for all his words, could not find any that would matter in the face of such quiet respect. It was a small thing. It was everything. Back at the ranch, life resumed its rhythm. She found herself humming while mending tack, a habit from childhood long forgotten. He noticed, though he said nothing. He simply lingered longer in the barn those days, sharpening tools, his presence a silent harmony to her melody. Their connection was not born of declarations or grand gestures. It grew in the spaces between words, in the subtle passing of a hammer, in the shared glance over a fixed fence post. Emotional safety unfolded not as a gift given, but as a home built brick by brick, each act of quiet kindness laying a foundation stronger than stone. The land, once indifferent to her presence, began to accept her too. Calves nuzzled her palms. The old mare whinnied softly when she passed. Even the stubborn rooster learned her rhythm. The ranch was not just a place to work. It became a place that worked with her. One evening, as dusk settled, she sat on the porch steps, watching the fields sway under a lavender sky. He joined her, not speaking, just sitting. The silence between them was no longer filled with unspoken questions or guarded walls. It was a companion in itself, warm and familiar. She realized in that love, true love, was not a sudden bloom. It was a slow, patient vine, wrapping itself around the cracks of old wounds, mending not by force but by presence. He had not saved her. He had simply given her the space to save herself. And that, she thought, was the most profound kindness of all. Spring had laid its soft hand upon the land, and with it came a meadow of wildflowers that danced in the breeze as if the earth itself were breathing in rhythm. She knelt among them, gathering colors that bore no resemblance to her own, no pale lilacs or delicate creams. These were bold blooms, fierce reds, sun-kissed yellows, deep indigos. She smiled as she worked, unaware how the sunlight fell upon her face, tracing the map of her years, her trials, and sculpting for them a beauty that no mirror could ever rightly reflect. In the attic, beneath an old canvas tarp, she found it, a lute, its strings long snapped, its wood cracked from seasons of neglect. She brushed the dust away, running her fingers over the carved patterns worn soft by time. It had once been loved. She could feel it in the way the instrument seemed to sigh beneath her touch. For days, in quiet hours after chores were done, she tended to it, restrung it with care, mended the splits with hands that knew the language of repair. She did not tell him. She simply left it on the porch bench one evening, the way he once left tools for her, no words exchanged. That night, after supper, as the sky deepened into indigo, he sat on that bench. His fingers found the strings, hesitated, then coaxed a melody from the silence. It wasn't a song played for her. It was a song born because of her. The notes wove through the warm night air, filling the spaces that had once been heavy with unspoken things. Their silence became music. The days folded into each other, gentle and unhurried. Summer crept closer. One night, the fireflies came, their tiny lights flickering like fragments of fallen stars. She perched on the fence rail, knees drawn up, watching them scatter their magic across the fields. He joined her, careful to sit at a respectful distance, as he always did. Their hands brushed by accident, or perhaps by fate's gentle nudge. Neither pulled away. The touch was not electric. It was grounding, a simple, human tether in the vast quiet of the plains. The night asked for no words. Presence was enough. In that shared stillness, something unspoken yet undeniable settled between them. But peace is a fragile guest in a world that remembers debts unpaid. The shopkeeper returned one afternoon, his voice as slick as the oil on his boots. He came under the pretense of business, offering to buy a portion of land, spinning his offer as if it were charity. His words, though coated in mock civility, dripped venom when his eyes met hers. "You ain't worth the dirt you dig in, girl. But I suppose every ranch needs a scarecrow." The insult rolled off her skin like water off stone. She stood, not with fists clenched, but with arms relaxed by her sides, a quiet power radiating from her stillness. "I'm worth more than your silver tongue could ever weigh," she said, her voice even, her gaze unwavering. "And this land will never belong to a man who measures worth in faces." The rancher said nothing. He stood beside her, his presence like the roots of an ancient tree, deep, silent, immovable. But as the shopkeeper turned, tail tucked in bruised pride, the rancher's hand found hers, a simple resting of palm against palm. No words, just weight, just warmth. That evening, as twilight softened the edges of the world, she stood at the basin, washing the day's dust from her hands. The water shimmered with the colors of the setting sun. He watched her from the doorway, leaning against a frame as though the house itself needed him to stay upright. He did not look at her face. His gaze followed her movements, the way her fingers smoothed out the folds of the dishcloth, the way her shoulders carried both strength and grace. In those small, unconscious actions, he saw the life she had built around him, for him, with him. "You've given me a home," he said, voice roughened by emotion he rarely let surface. "A life worth waking for." She did not reply with words. She turned, and her smile, soft, sure, and quietly victorious, was all the answer the timbered walls would ever need. Love had not burst forth like a storm. It had crept in, patient as ivy, weaving through cracks of two lives weathered by loneliness. They had not fallen in love. They had grown into it, one tender thread at a time, until it became something neither of them had the need to name. And in that unspoken understanding, their hearts found a resting place. The sunrise spilled red across the fields, a sky of flame and warning, as if the land itself sensed a storm that brewed on horseback. Dust rose like smoke behind the approaching riders. The shopkeeper, flanked by two hired men, their silhouettes sharp against the glowing horizon. Yet the ranch house stood unmoving, a lighthouse carved from timber and grit, refusing to bow beneath the weight of another man's greed. She stood by the window, watching them come. There was no tremor in her hands, no sinking of heart. She had once known the taste of fear, bitter and thick, when faces like theirs had sneered down at her from auction blocks. But that fear had starved here, withered beneath seasons of work, of quiet victories, of a life earned inch by inch. The rancher stepped onto the porch as the hose drew near. No gun rested at his hip, no show of power. He simply stood, arms loose by his sides, gaze as steady as a lamb beneath his boots. The shopkeeper's voice reached him first, oily and false sweet. "Come to settle old debts, rancher. Seems the girl's father left more than just unpaid bills. Figure it's time to claim what's owed, one way or another." The men behind him grinned, sure of the victory they had rehearsed in their minds. The rancher didn't raise his voice. He didn't take a step forward. He simply said, "You'll leave now, or you'll learn what it means to be small in a wide land." The air stilled, as though the earth itself was listening. There was no threat in his tone, no bravado, just truth. And somehow, that truth struck harder than any rifle could. The shopkeeper's smirk faltered, his bravado cracking beneath the weight of a man who did not need to shout to be heard. Then she stepped beside him, shoulders squared, chin level, eyes unwavering. She had been a woman sold, mocked, ignored. Today, she was a woman who had built a life. With her hands, with her heart, with every seed she had dared to plant in soil that once spat her out. "You've come thinking I'm still the girl on that platform," she said, her voice smooth as river stone. "You think you can measure me in debts and shame. But there's no price you can put on a life built with work, with sweat, with love. You don't own me. You never did." Her words hung in the air, slicing to the false power the shopkeeper had wrapped himself in. His mouth opened, searching for a retort, but the silence offered him none. Behind them, at a distance, the townsfolk watched, faces half hidden behind curtains, from porches, from storefronts. But this time, their eyes didn't narrow in mockery. They saw her, not as the plain-faced girl mocked for her broad frame, but as a woman standing unshaken, her voice echoing louder than their whispers ever had. The shopkeeper's shoulders stiffened, his pride bleeding out in silence. He muttered a curse, spun his horse, and left in a cloud of dust that could no longer blind her. The rancher's hand found hers, not in comfort, but in shared victory. They stood there, side by side, as the sun climbed higher, the world a little quieter, a little smaller in the face of their calm defiance. Seasons turned, and the ranch flourished. Word spread, not of scandal, but skill. Neighbors came, first for advice, then for admiration. They sought her hands for mending saddles, her eyes for spotting the first signs of sickness in livestock, her patience in teaching soil how to yield where it once resisted. The town that had once labeled her Ugliest began to see the beauty in things they had been blind to, the strength of shoulders that carried burdens without complaint, the grace in hands that could heal what was broken. Under the old oak tree, where wildflowers swayed like witnesses, they stood facing each other. There were no guests, no preacher, no fine dresses or speeches. Just two hands reaching across a space that no longer existed. "You've given me the most beautiful life," he whispered, his thumb tracing the edge of her calloused palm. "And you gave me the place to grow it," she answered, her smile as soft as the breeze that rustled the leaves above them. Their vows were not promises of forever. They were acknowledgments of the journey already walked together, of roots already entwined beneath the soil of this life they had crafted with quiet, relentless care. As dusk settled that day, the house they returned to was not just a shelter of wood and stone. It was a testament to work, to patience, to a love that never needed to declare itself allowed to be real. And perhaps, somewhere in the future, a child or a stranger would ask about them, about the woman once called the town's ugliest bride. And perhaps in that moment, the truth would be told, not in the shape of her face, but in the beauty of a life that defied the mirror. Beauty is not born in mirrors, nor sold at auction blocks. It is built in quiet hours, with hands that dare to plant seeds where others only see dust. Remember this. The most beautiful life is never the loudest one. It's the one you grow, brick by tender brick, with someone who sees your worth before the world ever does.